Pop quiz. If the price of oil goes down, what happens to the price of gasoline? Common sense dictates that gas would be cheaper too, but in Canada, that hasn't been the case. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that the price of oil has plummeted. West Texas Intermediate crude is down more than 30% since January of last year. This chart shows the national average price of regular gasoline in Canada. Gas has gotten cheaper since the summer, but it's still slightly more expensive than it was a year ago. Dan McTeague is Senior Petroleum Analyst with GasBuddy.com. Thanks for coming in.
Good to be here.
This is one of those things that just, I get this question probably more than anything else, and I find myself sort of scratching my head saying, well, how can this be? What is the disconnect between the collapse in oil prices and gas prices staying flat?
You know, it's not an easy answer, but the 2 points that I think is often overlooked, we price all of our commodities in U.S. terms. It's critical that people understand that when they're buying gasoline on the markets, they're actually buying it based on the strength of their currency. And here's the irony. Crude has dropped, it's dragged the Canadian dollar down with it. To point out just how important crude is to the totality of the Canadian economy, now it's down to $18, $19 a barrel or even less for our brand.
For the Canadian,
For the Canadian version, Western Canadian Select. It means that we've lost a significant amount of value in our dollar. So much so, you can actually quantify it, Peter. 9 cents a litre in lost purchasing power if you compare the dollar from this year and the price from last year.
Okay, so on January 20th, I don't have the exact dates, but January 20th of 2015, gasoline in this country on average cost 99.78. On January 12th of this year, it's 105.79. That even if you factor in the 9 cents, we're still at about even, while the price of oil has fallen quite dramatically in that time. Why? I get that it's a volatile mix of factors that lead to the price of gasoline, but that's a tough circle to square.
Well, 4 of 10 provinces have increased taxes in the past year. We also look at the fact that refineries in Canada, something you and I talked about for many years in the past, as we shut down refineries, as we rely more and more on Americans, well, what's happening in the United States with lower prices, they price it in US dollars, demand is going through the roof, refineries are not able to keep up, and so their margins, their refinery profit margins have increased, and they've increased even more in Canada, especially in markets like Toronto and Vancouver.
And didn't we see a refinery, an Irving refinery, shut down for 6 or 8 weeks?
2 months. The Irving refinery is down. So if we are going to beggar thy neighbor, knock on the door of the Americans to say, hey, listen, we haven't got enough gas for ourselves. How are you doing? They're saying, well, look, we have demand pictures that we have not seen ever. We see the automotive sales are going up there. The economy is moving much better. So that really puts an impinges on Canadian consumers. As if it isn't bad enough you're losing jobs on the crude front, as if it is bad enough that your Canadian dollar is taking a hit, you're paying a little bit more. Obviously, it's not a good time.
The scariest question of all is, where does it go from here? You guys do a lot of forecasting. Where do you see it moving now?
I still think it will go down a little further, although not as much as we want. I think the Canadian dollar continues to show weakness, obviously not always connected to crude. There will be a rationalization, if that hasn't happened already, with producers in North America and around the world. I think by the end of 2016, you can look at prices going right back up, at least on the crude side.
When the price of oil began to fall, initially people said, well, we'll be saving at the tank and it'll be maybe a net benefit, then sort of it'll be a wash, and now I think we've told each other that it's quite clearly a net negative. Is there anything that can be done from a policy perspective that would sort of help with the price of gasoline, or is this just the cost of doing business?
Well, I think transparency is most important. I mean, we do it here at GasBuddy, but I think it's important that we also have a reliable weekly forecast and actually an assessment of the supply and demand picture in Canada. I am concerned that in some instances there are shortages in Canada. We are not aware of them. I'm not asking any particular company to come out and say, hey, guess what, we're short. But overall, every Wednesday morning the U.S. provides and has, under the pain of law, a weekly petroleum status report. I think the Canadian picture should also be as transparent and as above board. I think that's a first important step towards knowing where we are. If you don't know where you're going, as Yogi Berra said, chances are you're going to wind up somewhere else.
Do you get a lot of pushback when you? I mean, you're a legislator. You've been involved in a bunch of different sides of this. Do the companies push back against that notion of transparency?
I don't think they do. I don't think it's necessary in this day and age, especially when many of those companies, parent companies, operate in the United States. I think that's the way of the world. It certainly is part of both the political and economic discourse. Markets and consumers deserve to have a little bit more information. If after all they're going to wind up paying a little bit more for the freight, they might as well be told why and how.
All right, Dan McTeague, it's a great website and a very valuable resource.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Cheers.